I'm Hirra Adeogun. I'm head of Car Free Cities at the British climate action charity Possible. At Possible, we want to see a zero carbon society built by and for everyone, and we want to see this fast. So this session is the final session in our Reimagining London, Paris and New York Summit, the launch of the Car Free Megacities campaign. It's a collaboration with the New Weather Institute, the Active Travel Academy, Brooklyn Spoke, and Paris Saint-Vaucheux. The campaign brings to life a positive vision for major cities to move away from mass private car ownership. We want to take space away from cars and give it back to people and nature. Now, from the outset, let's be really clear, a car-free city is a city which is free of the dangers, pollution and emissions caused by mass private car ownership. It's not a city with no cars at all. We recognise there's lots of people, including disabled people, who can't get around without a car. And our campaign to reduce the number of cars in cities will make their lives easier too. So our aim is to improve the livability of cities by dramatically reducing the number of cars on the road. At the same time, we want to promote best practice internationally and will encourage and inspire decision makers to raise ambitions and accelerate change at the city level. So this past year, we've seen big changes across our societies. We're in the midst of three global crises. There's an inequality crisis, there's the climate crisis, and of course, there's the COVID-19 pandemic. And these issues all intersect. So in this session, I'm honoured to be joined by three brilliant representatives from Paris, New York, and London to discuss what they've been working on and their future plans for their cities. So to kick things off, we have a pre-recorded message from David Belliard. He's the Deputy Mayor of Paris in charge of mobility and the transformation of public space. So I'm going to share that now.
Avec vous. Okay, Paris, just like the biggest cities, always has strongly impacted by cars. But the cars represent 45% of the public space, but it only represents 13% of the whole trips made by the inhabitants of Paris. So with this, we have challenges we need to tackle. We have to face climate change, and we have to face many heat waves, like many other social inequalities, for example. So the idea is that we need to have cleaner air. So we need to to reclaim the public space, and more specifically by reclaiming the space from cars. So we have initiatives, for example, like to have a cleaner air, to have a quieter streets, and less noise. And we do that for the families, for the children, so everyone can live together. So we can working hard to preserve the space around the schools in Paris. So we just working hard on make sure that cars don't drive past schools, so the kids can go out of school and they play on the roads, play in the streets. So the idea is to give the roads back to the pedestrians. This was the first part of the initiative, this idea to focus on children and families. So we have the have pedestrian roads, give the cities, the streets in the center of Paris back to the pedestrians, so they can play, they can enjoy themselves. This is just the only step. So now we just need to work on this, and so we need to work, but not only in the center of Paris, we need to work with all the suburbs in all the working class districts, and this is the priority. And this is something we want to offer to all the inhabitants of Paris and the suburbs. So we have launched a brand new initiative, something great. We'd like to transform 50% of the parking spaces and to give it back to the pedestrians. So to promote walking, cycling, and we have to create new cycle tracks. So we had discussions with all the inhabitants of Paris and all the citizens. So we had to free the space for them. So that represents 60 hectares, and that's huge. That's a huge place. It represents 3 times the size of the Butte Chaumont, one of the most famous parks in Paris. So we want to give the space back to the Parisians, the people living in Paris, the tourists, the kids, the families. So they can stroll, they can have a walk, they can enjoy life and enjoy themselves.
My apologies. I think it seemed to be clear for the people who were listening to the translation, not clear for those who were listening to the original French audio. What we will do is send out the video at the end alongside all of the PowerPoint presentations and the posters, so everyone gets an opportunity. Really sorry about that. We've been foiled by technology. But nevertheless, I think David Belliard was explaining why this campaign is so important in Paris and giving us a bit of a flavour in terms of the context in Paris. Live with us today, we have Charlotte Guth, who is from David Belliard's team. Charlotte heads up cycle planning at the Department of Roads and Transport in Paris. So Charlotte, I think you've prepared a little bit more in depth an overview of plans in Paris, which we're all really excited to hear about.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm sorry David couldn't be here with us, and unfortunately I'll be speaking in French. So for the people, French speakers in the audience, and you can have the translation, and I will share my screen with you. So. Okay, so I think you can see my screen, but I can't see the messages. So if there's something wrong, someone who's give me a sign with their camera. So I will give you a short illustration of what David just explained in the video. And that's what we want to do. So we have give you a few examples of what we accomplished in Paris, because we accomplished quite a few things in the last few years in Paris. So let's start briefly. One of the most important challenges in the previous mandate of the mayor and the current mandate is that to transform Paris and turn it into 100% cycling town. It means that everyone in the city may be able to take a bicycle to travel. And of course, the most obvious solutions are to have like cycle tracks. You can see on the right-hand side of the slide, or to just stop cars from coming in Paris. And you see on the left-hand side, you have the Rue de Rivoli, the famous boulevard in Paris. And it's also very important for the transport network is to make sure even the smallest, the narrowest streets are accessible. So we bring the speed limit down to 30 kilometers per hour. So is really transitory. It's not permanent, but we just started with this. It's just temporary for during the health crisis, but it's still ongoing in the streets. So we have this this whole thing happening in Paris. Another thing we did to reclaim this public space and give it back to the pedestrians. Well, we have two examples that we call voiture Berges. These are fast speed lanes on the banks of the Seine River. So we closed them. They closed to the automobiles, and now we gave it back to pedestrians, to bicycles, to what we call creative users. They really the symbol of what we're trying to do. It's quite difficult to for the elected representatives because they've been extremely criticized by drivers and car owners. But this is quite spectacular, to be honest, especially for pedestrians and cyclists and for children, sorry, for families. Everyone's extremely satisfied with this. So another example, and these are all the examples that in each street we have worked on each street to reduce the place for cars, and we have new trees, we have plants. We try to widen the pathway, the pavement for the users, and this is not publicized, and it's not in the media, but it's extremely important. But every time you take a street, you see an improvement in your quality of life, and it's fantastic for the inhabitants of Paris. And this is what I try to do everywhere in Paris. And we do that more specifically in front of schools. As David Belliard said, we try to do even more during the mayor's mandate in front of schools. The parents and the kids should be able to go freely and safely walking or just by bicycles. So without being afraid of being run over by a car or a motorcycle. So you can actually walk freely on the road. But this is what we're trying to do. Sometimes it's just temporary, but this is something we do about at 9 a.m. and at 5 p.m. But still a constraint because we have offenses.
Another element that is very important is to gain time. So to do things that are temporary. Temporarily, you don't give access to cars, and then the pedestrians can, or they can go by bike. And we call this Paris respire, so Paris breathes. We do this every Sunday or Saturday, depending on the area, where there are whole areas of Paris. So the most symbolic being the Champs-Élysées, where there are no cars and there are only pedestrians and bikes. These things are very important, and it allows us Parisians to breathe over the weekend because Paris doesn't have that much green space, and it allows us to understand to what extent we give so much space to cars most of the time. Another key element is to remove cars that do not move, the cars that are parked, and to not just pay attention to cars that move. They're parked in our street, and the aim is for half of this space to be reduced. So if you have a car that's not moving, and it to be repurposed for other usages. There has been a consultation with Parisians to ask them what they would wish for. There are lots of options. It could be outdoor spaces for restaurants. It could be areas to sort waste, because we have issues with where to put waste. We could put in terraces. We could put in bike parking, plants. There's a whole host of usages yet to be defined other than car park areas. I think that's it. Thank you, everybody.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Lots of great stuff happening in Paris, and I know we're all looking on enviously at the transformation going on there. I'm going to now take it to Dr. Will Norman in London, who is our first walking and cycling commissioner. Thanks for being here, Will. And I'm just going to hand over to you to give a bit of an overview as to what we've been up to.
Thank you ever so much, and thanks everyone. Nice to see so many people from all over the world talking about such exciting projects and sharing a goal. I am going to see if I can share my screen here. Excellent. So yes, I'm Will Norman. I'm the Mayor of London's Walking and Cycling Commissioner. I'm going to talk a bit about what we've been doing in London and particularly on how COVID has affected what we're doing. And I think what we can learn from during the COVID crisis and how we move forward. Like Paris, we have been focusing on how can we, at the very heart of the mayor's policy is how can we make space for people-friendly, healthy streets. Our transport strategy has an ambition to shift the number of journeys or the percentage of journeys from 63% of journeys being walked, cycled, public transport to 80% of all journeys being walked, cycled or public transport. Now that's a massive reduction in the number of car journeys around our city. And previous to, if I was giving this speech a couple of years ago, a year ago, I would be talking about the fact that we've been investing £150 million a year into our streets. We had tripled the amount, 3 times more protected cycle routes in London than we had before. Half our streets are now 20 miles an hour, similar to Paris, recognizing the need for lower speeds. But obviously COVID hit and changed everything, both in London. And for all the terrible things that happened during COVID, and they're still happening, one of the interesting things during lockdown was obviously there was much less traffic on the street. And as soon as there was less traffic on the street, something spectacular happened. Families started using that space. Kids started cycling on what would previously been busy roads like this one. People started walking around on the streets to their local parks. People started skateboarding or doing hula hooping, all sorts of wonderful things on space that had previously been used by traffic. The other notable thing in London which happened was a massive decline in the use of public transport. At one point, only 5% of the journeys previously made by the tube, the underground, were happening. And from my perspective, that raised massive alarm bells. If people were scared or afraid of using the tube, that could potentially be millions of journeys that were switching from a sustainable form of transport, a relatively clean form of transport or public transport, to more cars, which would lead to gridlock, congestion, which would be economic chaos in the city, but also toxic air. An air pollution crisis is the very last thing we need in a respiratory disease pandemic. So like other cities around the world, we decided to rapidly reallocate space from our cars and from the roads and motor vehicles, making space for people so that they could travel around. They could continue to cycle, like we saw in that previous picture. They could walk safely while creating that 2 meters or 1.5 meters social distancing. One of the things we did was take space from the road. Here is in Brixton in South London. This used to be a highway lane. We made it a bigger pavement at a busy transport interchange. And now there are 22,000 square meters of new pavement space on our main roads, just like this one. But we also have lots of smaller high streets around London. This one is in East London. This is what it usually looks like. Well, that was closed to vehicles. People could still make deliveries, but that transformed the street into a pedestrian-friendly space. You could see people queuing, and that is not only good for transport, it's not only good for health, it's also good for those local businesses, because all our research shows that if people walk and cycle, they spend more in those shops, and that's good for the high street when they need it, when these shops need it the most. We also have some big, busy main roads like Paris. This is Parc Lane, four lanes of traffic on this side and the same on the other side. This used to be 40 miles an hour. We reclaimed some of that space and made it part of a cycling network, safe cycling lanes. We also upgraded sort of faded old dangerous cycle lanes like this and putting in that. The transformation there, within less than 12 months, we delivered 100 kilometers of new cycle lanes in London. And we've seen a massive increase in the number of people cycling. Last weekend, there was a 200% increase in people cycling, 300% in some parts of London. And just to show how big a change this is, the bike shops are complaining to me that they're running out of bikes. This is a fundamental shift in the way that we move around our city. But it's not just about the main roads. It's not just creating the movement of our city. It's also about how we create new spaces. And this is an example of a low traffic neighborhood where we have filtered the roads in one of the local communities, reducing rat running, improving air quality. And what we see in these areas, and there's research out today, suddenly showed that 31% fall in the amount of traffic, 50% up in cycling. In other areas, we've seen a 42 minutes more walking a week than previously in these areas. This changes behavior, it makes it safer, it makes it cleaner air. Like Paris, the focus on the schools is really important. We now have over 330 new school streets. In fact, I'm losing count of them. I know there are another 4 that went out today. School streets are where we temporarily close the roads so that kids can get dropped off and picked up from school. This is a massive problem in London. Every day, every morning, over 250,000 car journeys are associated with the school run. When we do this, we see a big change. The school in Enfield in North London saw a 28% reduction in cars, 10% increase in scooting and skateboarding, 8% increase in cycling, 7% increase in walking. That's the change that we need to see. And if this happens with kids, that happens, that they take that habit for the rest of their lives. If you get kids active early, they'll be active for life. There's a huge amount more planned, and similar to Paris, where we've temporarily closed streets for schools, we've also been doing that for restaurants. I love the term streeteries, where the streets are converted into eateries, which allow restaurants to flourish. This has not been without controversy. We've had backlash against this. It's incredibly sensitive. We've had vandalism, we've had protests, we've had legal cases, court cases. But repeatedly, the polls and the surveys show that when people see these changes, they want them, they want to keep them, and they want more of them. We've learned that we need to do more engagement. We need to work more with local communities so that we get it right, and they're aware of the changes and why we're making the changes. But we've also seen that it's possible to do things faster. It's possible to experiment with things. It's possible to use more temporary materials and work at a pace that I thought would be extraordinary a couple of years ago. Thankfully, in the UK, we are beginning to see a light at the end of the COVID tunnel, I hope. We're seeing vaccination program being successfully rolled out, and I think about 1/3 of the population are now vaccinated. But although the COVID crisis, I hope, might be diminishing, the existing crises that we have got much worse. We have an obesity, we have an inactivity crisis. The inequalities in terms of health outcomes in the UK are terrible. We also have an air quality and air pollution crisis that many cities around the world do. And then, of course, there's the big one. There's climate change. We can't vaccinate against climate change. We have to tackle this. And over 25% of London's carbon emissions come from transport. We have to make it greener and cleaner to move around. On top of all this, we have a pending economic crisis. There is going to be less money to go around to deliver all of this. But we've shown that our healthy streets approach, making our streets for people works, and it delivers the outcomes we want to do. More walking, more cycling, less cars, less pollution, less road danger. But we need to do it faster, and we need to do less money, which we know is possible. I want to finish by concluding on what my 3 magic ingredients are for transforming the city. And I think the 3 things are, we need the political leadership. You need that political backbone, just like we heard in Paris. Here in London, we've got a mayor who's committed to this, who is cycling around himself. He's got asthma. He recognises the problems of air pollution. That leadership is there. You also need the technical expertise. And I want to say a huge thank you to everyone across London, all the engineers and the transport officers who've made all these changes possible. But most importantly, you need campaigning communities. And I think that's the most exciting thing that's happened over the last year. New people have started asking for this. People have seen what their roads, what their neighborhoods might be like in the future, and they want more of it. Those campaigning communities are, for me, what makes this so exciting about the future, because a new generation of people have got involved in this. So I want to thank everybody in London who's been part of this. I want to say, you've done an amazing job delivering what has happened over the last year. But I also want to say, keep it up. We've got so much more to do, and it's so urgent that we carry on doing it with the pace that we've been delivering in it. So I want to conclude by just saying a very simple thank you.
That's brilliant, Will. Thank you so much. I loved what you said about campaigning communities, and I hope that's what we are cultivating here in this space. I'm going to head over to New York, where we have Emily Weidenhof, who is Director of Public Space at New York City Department of Transportation. Emily works closely with community groups throughout the 5 boroughs to reimagine their streets as public space. Emily, before I hand over to you, just a quick reminder from our interpreters that if we could go at a slightly slower pace so they can keep up, that would be great. Take it away. You're on mute, Emily.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Very excited to be here with such a great group of people and cities. I'm going to speak a bit about our open restaurant program. At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, New Yorkers embraced their public space more than ever. It was incredibly amazing to see an outpouring and a demand of using our streets for people, for neighborhoods, for communities. And certainly New York City and the Department of Transportation and my team, the public space unit, had been thinking a lot about our programs, and were very kind of quick and nimble to respond with retooling all of the programs and community relationships to meet the needs of this crisis. And we began with open streets in the spring of 2020, where we were really trying to provide basics for communities across the city: safe space for social distancing, for recreation, for mental health, really trying to get people out safely. But with indoor dining closed, it was certainly a crisis for our restaurant industry, and one that the entire city was focused on helping this incredibly important part of New York City life. And we were incredibly encouraged by so much adaptation by restaurants and businesses on the ground in these early months, as well as what we started to see in initiatives in cities globally. And with that, we quickly recognized that we needed to use our streets to help restaurants and facilitate outdoor dining. And we went from becoming the Department of Transportation to the Department of Restaurants as well. And one of our biggest challenges, as you can see here, is pre-pandemic, New York City had 27,000 restaurants, which is just a massive scale and volume. And so we knew if we were going to really help the kind of broad range of restaurants and typologies in neighborhoods citywide, we needed to create a very simple, a very nimble system, and something that would translate in as many places as possible. And so in June of 2020, we launched our Open Restaurants program, which looked to create outdoor dining opportunities for businesses both on the sidewalk as well as in the roadway. And as we had anticipated, it was incredibly popular. We saw 1,800 applications on day one, 5,000 the first week, and 8,000 within the first month of launching the program. Key to the success of this program was something very new for the city, a self-certification model, where we were not asking restaurants to send a whole bunch of information. We weren't reviewing plans. We streamlined and created guidelines that were as simple as possible, and restaurants in a matter of minutes could self-certify. They could attest that they met certain criteria and begin to operate on our streets and sidewalks. It was also critical that we had real-time data to be able to track who was applying, to be able to inspect and make sure folks were being safe and operating in a way that still allowed pedestrians and cyclists to move through our streets, as well as being able to, in a very coordinated way, communicate with all of our all of our applicants. So having one system that was open and available to the public was so key, and our IT team worked tirelessly and was really phenomenal at delivering this amazing tool that we used, again, both on the front end, but also on the back end for inspections. And the product on the street really speaks for itself. If you've seen a lot of really amazing images in the news and in publications. And very quickly we moved from open restaurants to larger pedestrianized open streets restaurants. So where we were actually closing corridors to vehicular traffic, still allowing cyclists, but really creating more room for people to circulate, for safe social distance, but also for restaurants to expand and really utilize the warm weather months in New York City. It was a dramatic transformation. What had felt like a ghost town was suddenly full of life. Neighborhoods, really brought their own unique design and flavor to each of these spaces. Restaurants really went out of their way to create an amazing environment given incredibly constrained and challenging circumstances. And it really felt for many New Yorkers a breath of fresh air amidst, again, a tremendous amount of tragedy and hardship as part of the pandemic. And open restaurants really, for us, started to be the symbol of what life was like in New York City. Here you see some covers of the New Yorker, March of 2020, when the city shut down, a kind of empty, desolate city, but open restaurants really reflecting a new street life, a new public life in New York City. And we certainly saw that referenced and replicated in a whole series of popular culture references as well. But really, the open restaurant program and the open street program became an economic lifeline for restaurants, a hugely critical industry in New York City, and an industry that may have been obvious before the pandemic, but is certainly internalized by many New Yorkers now, really representative of communities across the city and what it means to support your neighborhood and your city. All of this and what is very much an active and alive program was also incredibly dependent on a tremendous amount of support and collaboration across a whole host of city agencies. So it was incredibly encouraging to see what can often feel and be just a massive bureaucracy, a huge city, a lot of silos. So many folks came together to make this program work. Everything from social media campaigns, public messaging, really building a culture around how we dine out and how we do it safely. A tremendous amount of support for small businesses who were both trying to figure out how they set up dining on the street, but also what are the safety protocols for their restaurant workers and how they can be applying for grants and who's going to be inspecting them when for what. A tremendously complex system that so many agencies came together, really worked to translate, to engage with businesses. Materials were created in 10 plus languages to try to reach the many diverse populations of our cities. We had a hotline through our Department of Small Business Services that was there to really walk restaurants through and bring them up to speed. There was also also a tremendous outpouring of support and collaboration from the design community, which was incredibly encouraging. Everything from a partnership with our Economic Development Corporation to pair pro bono design services with restaurants who needed help, making sure that restaurants were designing spaces safely, both for the winter weather months, but also to make sure they were accessible for people of various abilities. We also saw a tremendous amount of support for Black-owned businesses, folks coming out and really supporting at this time when the pandemic only exacerbated the systemic inequities that we've seen across our city. And then also designers coming and supporting the neighborhoods that were hardest hit by COVID, and making sure that neighborhood corridors, whether it be in the central business districts or neighborhoods in the far reaches of Queens, that everyone had a quality restaurant, dining, and ultimately public space in their neighborhood. And so all told, over the past year, we created 65 plus miles of open streets. We have a little over 11,000 restaurants that have applied to the program, retaining 100,000 jobs, and a little over 15 miles of open streets restaurants, 91 different open streets that have been fully pedestrianized at times of the day to create this much broader, larger public realm experience. And certainly this has been a tremendous example of for our city and for the way we plan in terms of thinking about citywide relief. And again, going beyond some of the typical business centers, commercial corridors and neighborhoods, and looking at a much broader network of neighborhoods. Having people spend a lot more time at home also raised awareness and advocacy for safer streets in residential neighborhoods, and the need for different types of public space in residential neighborhoods as well, which for us is incredibly important as we think to the future. Both our Open Streets program and our Open Restaurants program are permanent. And I'll leave you with just one quick thought as we think to the future. Certainly, it's always very easy to see all the beautiful photos. I'll spare you the photos of restaurants leaning into bus lanes or blocking bike lanes. But certainly as we think about outdoor dining in the future, we certainly want to maintain our ability to think about streets as critical transportation assets. And so continuing to balance and maintain the ability to design our streets for pedestrians, for cyclists, for public transit, as much as for public space, as well as these photos here, which show you kind of the character of open restaurants on the off hours. There were plenty of high peaks for open restaurants, but certainly low peaks as well. Parts of our street which were just used for recycling and empty. And I think for us that really speaks to the need to think more flexibly about our streets and demand and design more. And so as we move forward and think about a more comprehensive design of our streets, we kind of move beyond the binary of single uses or a street is open or closed, but really create a much broader gradient of street design, everything from what we know is the new hardware of normal safe streets to self-enforcing slow speed blocks, shared streets, and additional pedestrian space, and how we can use all of our tools, a lot of the lessons that we've learned over the past year to more precisely manage our streets for the different demands and for a wide variety of uses. So ultimately, our streets are doing more for more people. Thank you.
Amazing, Emily. Thank you so much. I've been seeing so much action in the comment section, people talking about how inspiring it is, how it's kind of been a bit of a lifeline for New York during really challenging times. And so thank you for all the work that you and your team have been doing. I'm going to open up the floor for Q&A in just a moment. There's lots happening. But before I turn over to the public, I'm going to sneak in a question to all three representatives, if I can. So we've been laying out our vision for Car Free Megacities today. We've talked about, you know, how it's possible. We've talked about what people are currently doing on the ground. And we've just heard you speak about, you know, your plans for your cities that you've implemented or you're going to implement to draw us closer to that vision. So bearing all of that in mind, what excites you about what other cities are currently doing, and how do you see that working in your city? So Charlotte, I guess I'll start with you.
Okay, I can answer in English. Sorry for the translation team. You will have to translate in French. I think it's. I think we all are going in the same direction in London, New York, and Paris. We have a lot of the same problems. I think high density cities with everyone wanting to go in the really center. And we are looking at the same solution. So I think it proves that we are going in the good way because we are all doing the same thing. I think the Open Street program from New York was quite impressive with the way you almost industrialized the thing. It's quite impressive. I'm not in charge of the terrace stuff in Paris, so I don't know how my colleagues did, but still, a good job. And yeah. I cannot hear you.
I was just saying thank you very much, and I was going to pass over to Will.
There's so much exciting stuff happening around the world, isn't there? And I spend quite a lot of my time learning from other people. You know, Paris and the ambition that Paris has been really inspiring. And I think the restaurant side of things in New York has been a real inspiration in London. And we've been sort of doing some of these things, you know, a bit like our school streets. We did that with a small number, and suddenly that scaled up. And we've been doing the same thing with a small number of restaurants, and it'd be wonderful to see that scale up, particularly as we come out of the crisis. But for me, what's so inspiring about all these cities is that it's happening, that this is happening. We have shared challenges, but we're overcoming them in our own different ways, and each city, each street is different. But there is a growing global demand for this. And I think all three of us, you know, what's so exciting about this seminar is that we're all mega cities. We're not as small as Amsterdam or Copenhagen. This proves a very, very different challenge when you're talking about a city as big as New York or Paris or London. But what we're showing is that it's possible, yeah? And therefore, that is really, you know, the three cities are setting the world on fire. And for me, we need to keep being competitive with each other. You know, I know my mayor watches what goes on in Paris. Yeah, I know that the New York mayor is watching what's going on in London. You know, we've got to keep that rivalry, because that rivalry helps things progress. And we need to keep stealing each other's ideas. We need to shamelessly steal the good ideas and make it work for our streets. So I think this is, you know, just seeing Emily and Charlotte's presentations and hearing from the deputy mayor in Paris is inspiring.
Thank you, Will. You're up for the competition.
We will win.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't be biased as the chair, can I? I'm going to hand over to Emily.
Yeah, I think something I admire, as well as my colleagues do, about both London and Paris, is just the really sophisticated messaging that you have created around the benefits of these types of treatments. I mean, particularly, I feel like you guys are really a step ahead in terms of talking about air quality impact, which is, I think, a place where we want to be as a city, because certainly these types of pedestrian and bike priority streets have such a deep set of benefits, and the better we can kind of communicate that. And again, I think the way both of you also are talking about schools, about children, about families, we can't say no to making places better for families and kids. And I just think that's really brilliant, and definitely something that we will be continuing to look to and aspire to get to.
Thanks very much for your answers there. Okay, I'm going to try to combine a few of the questions that we've got in the chat box. So one of them is around, can we hope that initiatives like extending restaurant terraces in empty parking spaces and pavements will continue after lockdown? And I think that's a question to Charlotte and Emily. But then also even extended to other, occupation ideas, so play areas, rest areas once the pandemic is over. And will initiatives be removed after COVID? And a question, I guess, for Will is also, how do we keep up with the momentum from the public around people cycling particularly? So does anyone want to go first? Will, you're already unmuted.
Okay.
Oh, well, Emily, you just did.
I knew I should have hit the mute button. So can I just ask for clarification here? Your point around keeping up the momentum, do you mean by keeping up the number of people cycling, or how do we respond to the ever-growing numbers?
I suppose, I guess it's a bit of both, actually. So people are really...
Hopefully it does turn into a virtuous circle, so that more people cycle, therefore and that reinforces each other. I think there are a few things that we are doing. One is the continued and sustained rollout of the Safer Cycle network to get more people cycling, whatever background they're from, whether they're old or young, or they're from an ethnic minority, or they're women, or they are kids, or whoever they are, to get more people cycling. They need to feel safe on our streets. And the only way to make people feel safe on the streets is provide safe space for them on the streets. So in terms of continuing the record increases that we have been seeing in London, the key thing is continuing to invest in safer cycle infrastructure. There are, of course, other things that we need to be doing to then enable those people who may be tempted to cycle or thinking about it. Those include bike share, our bike hire system, grants to specific groups in specific communities. So there's a wonderful program in part of East London that is working with women from faith communities, so working with mosques. So how can you provide going to existing social networks and introducing cycling there. But there's also upskilling people in terms of providing training for kids through the school network, but also through adults. And then we've also introduced some online training videos, which are actually available from anywhere around the world. So if you're using them in the States or in Paris, do remember that we cycle on the other side of the road in London. I wouldn't want that to cause any problems.
Thanks, Will. And I'll go to Emily.
Yeah, so thankfully, our mayor recognized that we need to work to kind of codify and make these programs permanent to kind of continue the sustained benefits that we've seen through kind of all of our many open programs over the past year. And so both with open streets as well as open restaurants, there's a large team of folks kind of actively working to in a far more technical sense, make the programs permanent, and a lot of also really kind of critical and smart thinking about translating from a crisis to more normal times, and making sure we're, again, preserving the balance, and that we are not kind of indefinitely giving a piece of the right of way over to a restaurant that we may want to transform into a bike boulevard in the future, or a bus lane. And so really working on all of the kind of nuanced guidelines and kind of revamping of a permanent program that's needed to maintain that balance. Because again, as you said in the beginning, it's so critical to recognize just how far we can take our streets in rebalancing them for pedestrians and cyclists, but also an honest acknowledgement that there is, access needed for deliveries, for, picking up and dropping off people, for emergencies, things like that. And the better and the more kind of upfront we are about all the needs, I think the better design solutions we're able to come to. And for us, I think that just one of the most exciting tools that really went on hyperdrive over the past year that we're so excited to continue to deploy is this time of day management, this precision use of our streets that can be light touch, but also laser focused on demand and who needs to use the street when.
Thanks, Emily. And last but not least, going to head over to Charlotte.
Okay, so just, in Paris, we intend to keep almost everything we have done during the COVID crisis. So the terrace we gave to restaurants, the place we gave to cyclists, pedestrian autobuses, we intend to keep it. We intend to change it to permanent things, so permanent cycle lane, permanent terraces for restaurants. And of course, we have a big event in a few years in Paris, and we intend to have more beautiful thing in the streets than pink plastic plow. So the goal is really to keep everything as not as it is. Maybe some adaptation has to be found at some places, but the goal is really to keep doing that and even go further. Do more cycle lanes, do more terraces for restaurants, more places for, of course, trees and vegetation. So we keep going. And for the cyclists, we gain during the pandemic. I think when people start to cycle, they don't change, even when cars are coming back, because cycling in Paris is the best way to travel, actually, because public transportation is quite crowded. The car is obviously not a solution. So I think we will keep the cyclists, but we will have problems because we have actually too many cyclists. We have car-bike problems. We have intersections that are overcrowded for cyclists, like cyclists cannot cross. So some challenges are ahead for us with too many cyclists, I'm afraid. That's a good thing.
That's a good problem to have. Thank you, Charlotte. A very quick question I'm going to put to everyone around a just transition to a car-free city. So we commonly hear people talk about what a just transition to a car-free city might look like. What exactly does that mean to you, and why is it important for the communities in your cities? Will, you're unmuted again. Go for it.
So I think this is all about fairness. It's not fair that some people have worse health outcomes. It's not fair that some people breathe more polluted air. It's not fair that some people have worse mental health. It's not fair that some people pay much more for transport than other people. And so this is all about fairness. We have to invest in all our communities to give everybody the same opportunities to enable them to get the benefits of being more active. And so for me, this is the very heart of what we are trying to do, is essentially around fairness. Everybody, irrespective of their age, ethnicity, income, their ability, their health status, should be able to get around our city, whether it's walking, cycling, wheeling, if you're in a wheelchair, in a healthy, sustainable way, and have access to our public transport system as well as our active transport system. And for me, that sits at the very heart of everything that we're doing.
Emily, can I come to you for a quick comment on just transition?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it was streets in New York and other cities. You all may have experienced this as well. This collision between having the privilege to sit out to side and be enjoying outdoor dining while a protest was passing by, literally people fighting for their lives. And all of this kind of is a confluence on our streets. And even from the tiniest detail of the kind of quick and easy police barricades that we use for open streets, recognizing how that is a symbol and that sends a message as to whether a street is welcoming or not, using something that is, we used it to share our streets, but it's also something that's been used to separate communities as well. So thinking through those details to make these efforts overall more welcoming to a larger group of people, but also I think as Will said earlier, more community engagement, really working, at a pace that meets where each community is. We have kind of long had a public-private partnership model in our public space programs that, even at its best intention, really shows huge gaps and blind spots in how we're able to leverage funding and support to help neighborhoods across the city. So I think continuing to also advocate for a budget that is able to deliver support in neighborhoods where there isn't time and there isn't capacity and there isn't necessarily institutional private structures, whether it be a business improvement district or some other organization that's specifically set up to think about and manage the streets as a higher quality public space. Really working towards models and again, advocating for funding that can deliver higher quality benefits, particularly to the large swaths of New York City that have not received these benefits and this kind of attention.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much, Emily. And Charlotte, I'm going to go to you for the final word before we wrap up.
I think I will not add much to what have been said because it's the same for everyone. I would just add that one thing of the fairness is that everyone should be allowed to choose whatever they want to use as a mean of transportation, and that means that you should be able to choose to cycle or to walk wherever you want to go, and this is not actually the place everywhere. Also, the car is only less than 50% of trips. In some place in Paris, you cannot choose to cycle, and it's not fair because you should be allowed to choose.
Mm. That's a great tagline to end on. You should be allowed to choose. So with that, I want to say a special thank you to Will, Emily, and Charlotte for being with us today. Thank you to David Belliard for sending us the video presentation. Apologies that the sound was not the best. What we're going to try to do is, if any French attendees are interested, we're going to, at the end, if you hang on, we're going to try and replay it if you're interested, but we will be sending it out to all attendees regardless. I also want to say a special thank you to our partners for helping us put together, this event: Andrew, Doug, Kathy, Rachel, and thank you to the Possible team working in the background. Special thanks to Leo, Emma, and Liz for working on this. I'm not going to name everyone in the team, but it's been a real team effort to get this going in such a short amount of time. And most importantly, thank you for being with us today, for sharing your thoughts and your time and your support and your encouragement. Let me encourage everyone to sign up for updates at the Car Free Megacities website. That's carfreemegacities.org. We've got some exciting things coming your way in a few weeks' time, which I don't think you're going to want to miss. I mean, without wanting to hype it up too much, I'm hyping it up loads. I mean, sign up. And with that, have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. We'll definitely be wanting to see you all again soon. Take care and be safe. And as I said, if there are any French speakers who want to hang on, we'll try and replay the video that you missed from David Belliard. Thank you.